Fort Henry has fallen. The capture of Fort Henry and the nearby Fort Hyman, which had been abandoned shortly before the bombardment of Fort Henry, meant that the Tennessee River was in Union control. Wasting no time, Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant turned his attention to the more heavily fortified Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. Grant initially plans on taking the fort by February 8th, but runs into challenges that delay him. Poor weather conditions, the late arrival of reinforcements, and difficulties moving the ironclads up the Cumberland forced Grant to delay his advance on the fort. Grant would recall in his memoirs, "The rain continued to fall so heavily that the roads became impassable for artillery and wagon trains." Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston allows a garrison to remain at Fort Donelson, despite believing that no earthen fort could withstand the power of the Union gunboats, and sends reinforcements and new commanders to the fort. Johnston assigns Brigadier General John Floyd as the commander of Fort Donelson on February 11th, and Floyd decides that a hasty retreat is unnecessary, and that his garrison of 16,171 soldiers, combined with improved artillery positions and earthworks, will be enough to hold the fort. Grant knows that Floyd is in command of the garrison, as well as his lack of experience as a soldier, and correctly determines that there would be no interference with his reconnaissance. He suspected that Floyd would yield to General Gideon Pillow, whom Grant knew from the Mexican War. Through reconnaissance, two roads are discovered that are available to march on. One led to the town of Dover. The other led to Fort Donelson, which was 2 miles north of Dover. General Henry Halleck, commanding all Union armies at the time, was neither for nor against Grant moving on Fort Donelson, but was more in favor of Grant having Fort Henry fortified, and so sent out a dispatch to Grant on the 10th of February, while Grant was already in position in front of Fort Donelson. Grant understood the importance of capturing Fort Donelson, and he was very impatient to do so. Grant orders Flag Officer Andrew Foote to move his gunboats up the Cumberland River towards the fort, and General John McClernand out a few miles so as to leave the road as free as possible. At around the time they were about to start, Grant receives his reinforcements from the transports. 6 full regiments, a brigade commanded by Colonel John Thayer of Nebraska, whom Grant ordered to turn about and go under their convoy as the gunboats were going around to Donelson by the Tennessee, Ohio, and Cumberland rivers. Now, with 15,000 men, 8 batteries, and part of a regiment of cavalry, Grant started the advance from Fort Henry and arrived in front of the enemy by noon with no obstruction to slow him down. In his words from his memoirs, that afternoon and the next day were spent in taking up ground to make the investment as complete as possible. Grant ordered Brigadier General Charles Smith, who had instructed Grant at West Point and was now under Grant's command, to leave a portion of his division behind to guard Forts Henry and Hyman, leaving General Lew Wallace with 2,500 men. With the remainder of his division, Smith occupied Grant's left, extending to Hickman's Creek. General McClernand was on the right, and was responsible for covering roads running south and southwest from Dover. His right extended to the backwater, up the ravine opening in the Cumberland south of the village. His troops were not entrenched, but the landscape protected them from the enemy in a similar manner as the rifle pits. The Union line was placed along a crest of ridges. The artillery was sunk into the ground, keeping it protected. The biggest disadvantage was the cold conditions. It was midwinter, and rain and snow would thaw and freeze alternately, and campfires were not allowed except down the hill far out of sight of the enemy. During the march to Fort Donelson, many of the men threw away their blankets and overcoats, making the situation more uncomfortable. The Confederate forces entrenched in Fort Donelson numbered around 21,000 men, in between February 12th and 13th. Grant's army of 15,000 men without Wallace's division and Thayer's brigade confronted the entrenched rebels without conflict further than what was brought on by ourselves, as Grant later wrote. Only a little skirmishing each day with no severe fighting except once on the 13th when General McClernand's division was being harassed by a Confederate artillery battery in the main Confederate line, which was defended by the whole army. In response, McClernand sent 3 regiments to assault the battery without orders to do so. The assault ended in failure. The Union losses were great. Colonel William Morrison, in command of the 3rd Brigade, was badly wounded. On the 13th, Grant orders Captain Henry Walk to open fire on the fort with his gunboat, the Carondelet. Many shots fell inside the fort. At night, Flag Officer Foote arrived with the ironclads St. Louis, Louisville, and Pittsburgh, and the wooden gunboats Tyler and Conestoga, with Thayer's brigade in tow. On the morning of the 14th, with Thayer landed, Wallace is ordered from Fort Henry and arrives at the same time. Now restored to his full strength, Wallace commands a division composed of Thayer's brigade and other reinforcements that arrive on the same day, and placed in the center, giving the 2 flanking divisions an opportunity to close up and form a stronger line. Grant writes again in his memoirs, the plan was for the troops to hold the enemy within his lines, while the gunboats should attack the water batteries at close quarters and silence his guns if possible. Some of the gunboats were to run the batteries, get above the fort, and above the village of Dover. I had ordered reconnaissance made with the view of getting troops to the river from above Dover in case they should be needed there. That position attained by the gunboats, it would have been but a question of time, and a very short time, too, when the garrison would have been compelled to surrender. It is now 3:00 p.m. on February 14th, and Foote is ready to commence his assault. He advances towards the water batteries with his entire fleet of gunboats and opens fire with every gun he has and bombards the fort. The leading gunboat was believed to be no further than 200 yards from the fort. The Confederates inside the fort are able to hold their own, and the assault is a failure. Many of the gunboats are badly damaged, and Foote is wounded as the Union Navy is forced to retreat. As night approaches, Union soldiers are demoralized by the defeat during the day. 2 of the strongest gunboats were disabled, and the night ahead is bitterly cold. The men were without tents and could not keep fires where most had to stay. It is now the morning of February 15th. Foote is forced to withdraw his gunboats for repairs, and Grant is initially considering an extended siege, but soon finds it unnecessary, as the Confederates draw up plans of their own to force open a path of escape by attacking the Union right. McClernand's division was attacked by the full force of the Confederate troops and driven from Dudley Hill, where they were positioned. Wallace sent Thayer's brigade to aid McClernand and helped hold the rebels at bay. The men from McClernand's division found themselves low on ammunition, as their commanders at this stage in the war were not educated on the importance of keeping their supplies replenished at all times during an engagement. The division broke and a portion retreated, but most only fell back so as to get out of range of the enemy fire. The division attempts to reform their lines, but ongoing Confederate attacks continued to drive them to the southeast. Thayer pushed his brigade forward soon after, and the Confederate Brigadier General Gideon Pillow orders his attacking force to retreat back to their entrenchments. A mistake that opens up an opportunity for Grant, who seizes it and orders McClernand and Wallace to regain lost ground. Grant moved about to assess the situation to the best of his ability that the bad road conditions would allow. He determined that the odds were in his favor in the left and center, but saw the situation unfold on the right. When he arrived on the field, he found that the Confederates were in their entrenchments, and the Union men were excited, and no officer seemed to be giving directions. The soldiers were armed but out of ammunition. However, there was plenty nearby that the officers were not getting to the troops. Grant later wrote in his memoirs that he turned to Colonel Joseph Webster, his chief of staff, and said, "Some of our men are pretty demoralized, but the enemy must be more so, for he has attempted to force his way out, but has fallen back. The one who attacks first now will be victorious, and the enemy will have to be in a hurry if he gets ahead of me." Grant was now determined to make an assault on his left before the enemy could redistribute his forces along the line and make his escape. Grant and Colonel Webster rode through the Union lines, and Grant later states in his memoirs that he said to the men, "Fill your cartridge boxes quick and get into line. The enemy is trying to escape, and he must not be permitted to do so." As they reached General Smith's headquarters, he directed him to charge his whole division against the Confederate works in his front. By the night of the 15th, Smith is bivouacked within the lines of the enemy. During the night, Confederate leaders hold a council of war to discuss their options. After much debate, they determine that surrender is the only option. Generals Floyd and Pillow abandon their men and flee across the river, leaving Brigadier General Simon Buckner in command. Grant, who knew Buckner at West Point, considered Buckner a much more capable soldier. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was disgusted with the decision to surrender Fort Donelson, also makes his escape with his cavalry. On February 16th, Grant receives a communication from General Buckner. "Sir, in consideration of all the circumstances governing the present situation of affairs at this station, I propose to the commanding officer of the federal forces the appointment of commissioners to agree upon terms of capitulation of the forces and fort under my command, and in the view suggest an armistice until 12 o'clock today. I am, sir, very respectfully, your obedient servant, S.B. Buckner, Brigadier General, CSA. Grant's reply: Sir, yours of this date proposing an armistice and appointment of commissioners to settle terms of capitulation is just received. No terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted. I propose to move immediately upon your works. I am, sir, very respectfully, your obedient servant, U.S. Grant, Brigadier General. So with that, General Buckner surrendered the Confederate forces at Fort Donelson. Now with Fort Hyman and Fort Henry and Fort Donelson all captured, the Union forces have almost unrestricted access to the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers. The capture of Fort Donelson shoots General Grant into the national spotlight, earning him the nickname Unconditional Surrender Grant. With the capture of Fort Donelson, the Union forces can also move further south towards Corinth, Mississippi, where there will be an engagement later in the year, a couple months down the line, and also this turn of events will inevitably lead to the Battle of Shiloh in southwestern Tennessee. So that's my account of the Battle of Fort Donelson. This is from General Ulysses S. Grant's perspective, and I got his memoirs right here that helped me a lot. It's the best source of information I could have come by. I have his letters written down in here and everything, the communication between Grant and Buckner. I really didn't know how else to go about doing this video, because I'm not very tech savvy when it comes to editing videos. I didn't really know how to go about doing a documentary, editing all the pictures in and whatnot with a video this long. And I would have preferred it not be this long, but it happened. I thought I'd give it a try and just do a discussion about it. So that's what I did. And I just I'm nearly a month overdue on this video, because the Confederate forces surrendered Fort Donelson on February 16th, and it's March 8th now, I think. But yeah, I just wanted to get this video out of the way as quickly as possible, and that's what I did. I hope to do shorter videos in the future, but I hope you enjoyed the video. My purpose with these videos is to educate the few who will probably watch these videos, but yeah, that's it.